set the fairway on fire. The precision, the edge, the contest, the electric energy. Now, the NDTV PGTI Golf Pro-Am travels to Hyderabad, a day crafted for an unmatched experience. NDTV PGTI Golf Pro-Am, the course of champions, the conversation of leaders. 10th January 2026, Boulders Hills Golf and Country Club. The nerve center of the maximum city, the BMC, a contest that will shape Mumbai's next decade, its identity, its legacy, its future. NDTV brings you the battle for Mumbai, asking who will hold the keys to India's richest civic body and what would it mean for Mumbaikars. BMC Power Play, only on the NDTV network.
21 days in Kashmir. People have bombarded me, friends, with requests for an unfiltered list of things I saw and observed on the ground. Very special ground report from the line of control. There were some children who've lost limbs in the shelling. They're now India's smallest, but possibly the most powerful crime family. Cough syrup has killed at least 25 children. Gaikwad sahab, aise mat kijiye. Suddenly people are wondering about the weaponization of India-Pakistan cricket. We live and breathe elections. You will not believe your eyes or ears when I show you what I'm about to do. And for a country that has fought so many wars in the mountains and at high altitude, we're standing on the Indian Navy's newest warship. The line of control, Shiv, Aroor, NDTV.
What seems settled for me is unfinished business. So I rewind, I pause, I reflect, I dig until what's buried stands up to be counted. Breaking ground, not just headlines, the meaning behind them. This is Breaking Ground with me, Vedika Sood.
Across the country.
He has tracked the pulse of power from Washington to Korea.
In the wake of Donald Trump's armed intervention in Venezuela, global shockwaves continue as to what next, where next, and even who's next. Few people are better placed to understand and interpret this new normal than Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, the world's most well-regarded public policy analyst, renowned American economist, university professor at Columbia University, an outspoken critic of American foreign policy. He made headlines yesterday with an explosive briefing at the UN Security Council, blisteringly condemning the US military operation that captured the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro as an illegal act of aggression and a violation of the UN Charter. Welcome to NDTV, Professor Sachs. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you.
My first question to you, sir. In your United Nations Security Council briefing, you highlighted a pattern of US regime change operations since 1989. How much of an escalation, Dr. Sachs, do you view the Venezuela operation as?
Well, by itself, it's not an escalation because, as I pointed out, regime change is an addiction of the US security state. And we have had probably 100 attempted regime change operations by the US security state since the end of World War II. They come in many forms: wars, coups, deliberate instigated unrest to overthrow governments, stringent economic sanctions to crush the economy, assassinations, bribing militaries to take over governments, arresting officials or encouraging the arrest of officials. So there are many ways that the United States operates, but it's not unusual for the U.S. to overthrow or to try to overthrow another government. It's repulsive in my mind. One of the reasons is it's against international law and U.S. law, but it also almost never works in the sense of delivering some kind of stable government, much less a government good for the people. Most of the time, it leads to chaos. Now, Trump is different. He is more vulgar. He has taken his foot off the brake of this security state, because part of what presidents normally have to do is to tell this mega military machine, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. Trump is saying, no, we're going to do it all. We're going to overthrow Venezuela. We're going to run Venezuela. We're going to take Greenland. Canada's our 51st state.
Yeah.
Mexico better watch out. Iran, we're locked and loaded, ready to go after you. So he's making threats left and right. He's personally, in my opinion, an unstable individual psychologically. He's an old man. He doesn't understand very much, and he doesn't look ahead very far, that's for sure. But the deeper point is the underlying U.S. foreign policy is based on regime change. And here's a president who is stoking it, not discouraging it.
Since you spoke about Greenland, and we've seen it mentioned 3 or 4 times since the Venezuela operation, Dr. Sachs, he's spoken openly about wanting Greenland from an American national security requirement. Do you think he's going to do something? It is true that Trump is temperamental and unpredictable, but with Venezuela, he's shown that he is willing to do what he talks about.
I've been saying for many months that one day he will say, we have spotted Chinese submarines off the coasts of Greenland. We must move for our national security. And then he will land another 10,000 U.S. troops, and he will declare that Greenland is part of the United States. I think it's odds on. It's not certain, but it is quite a realistic prospect. And I was bemused, if I could use that strange word, that Trump actually said yesterday, there are Chinese and Russian ships all over the place. So he actually used almost exactly the language that I have been predicting that he would use. And I think that he means it. Again, he's filled with the kind of megalomania and grandiosity. And it's an interesting mix, because the deep state has its vision. This is not driven by Trump, this agenda. The arrogance and hubris of a wannabe global hegemon is pretty deep in the US system. Even when you have a nice president, very mild like Barack Obama, after all, he launched a war against, to overthrow the Libyan government. He assigned the CIA the task of overthrowing the Syrian government. He oversaw the U.S. participation in the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. So again, deep state. But Trump, he dances on this. The other ones would hide it, but Trump is almost in a joyous state of mind right now.
Very true. Dr. Sachs, the Trump administration has justified its Venezuela intervention, on humanitarian and democratic grounds. There's a lot of grandiose statements that have been made about how, you cannot let something in your backyard, be a platform for your adversaries, and America has to establish itself as the preeminent power in this hemisphere, etc. Is this any different from past interventions?
Yes, in a couple of senses, one should say that when you hear this kind of patter, this is the normal blah, blah, blah that we Americans listen to day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out. They make up whatever excuses they want. It's a storyline. The storyline for a couple weeks was about narco trafficking. Then it's about Russian and Chinese intervention. Then Trump lets out, because he can't help himself, it's really about oil. It's about oil. We got to get all that oil. So this is patter. And as I pointed out in my testimony to the UN Security Council yesterday, we've been at attempted regime change against Venezuela back to at least 2002, when the CIA was in one way or another, not completely known, involved or pre-notified of a coup attempt against Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez.
Yeah.
One of the things that keeps the U.S. especially interested is oil, of course. This is the largest proved reserves on the official data in the whole world, larger than Saudi Arabia's. And definitely, this is one of the reasons why this regime change has been pursued so assiduously for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And especially when this leftist government of Chavez and Maduro semi-nationalized the industry, or effectively nationalized it around 2007. That raised the temperature and the ire of the United States. And one of the things that's happening right now, Trump knows that America's fossil fuel reserves from fracking have basically peaked. And the U.S. Doesn't have such a long future on its fossil fuels. Now, if we had any kind of sanity, we would say, good, we need to move to renewables anyway. That's the whole point. But Trump is in love with oil, and so he wants to grab Venezuela's. And so this is definitely a core motive for what's happening.
India and Trump are having a long conversation over oil, which I'll come to in just a bit, Dr. Sachs. But how do you interpret, to move from the United States now to Europe, the very tame responses by the UK and several EU leaders to Trump's actions in Venezuela and these stated intentions on Greenland, which is a part of NATO? How do you see that?
Well,
they don't have a choice?
Europe, the European politics are pathetic. And this is a whole nother matter. But Europe basically became a vassal region of the United States already decades ago. And they can't shake that. Yeah. And the whole generation of European leaders have been long vetted by the United States. You know, it's been a kind of pattern from decades that if you're a young rising politician and you're anti-American, well, you're not going to rise very far in Germany or France or other parts of Europe. In the UK, believe me, it's just, they think that they're the British Empire till this day. So Britain loves imperial daring do, so they don't even oppose in any way, even privately, what's happening. Now, what's interesting is their response by Maduro, you know, we're not going to say anything about that. But then when Trump said, yeah, and I'm going to take Greenland, oh, then they got excited. No, that's against international law. So it's sad. I actually like Europe a lot. You know, I like European, I like the culture and the quality of life. But the political class right now is just unable to say a coherent sentence that makes sense. They're so afraid of the Russians, who are not going to invade, that they're opening themselves up to a U.S. which is likely to invade.
No, I completely agree with you. It's pathetic. And in fact, just as we began doing this interview, Dr. Sachs, a bunch of European leaders have put out a joint statement, which doesn't make things any better. It's still a very tame sort of joint comment that they've made on the Greenland issue. But, staying with that particular aspect, the Prime Minister of Denmark has said that if Trump carries out this threat of taking Greenland, it would essentially mean the end of NATO. In your view, is that a very real possibility under Trump, the end of NATO?
Yes. I think Trump himself, given the superficiality anyway, given the proclivities that Trump has, given the simplistic ideas of the U.S. that we need to pivot to Asia because China's the great threat. End of NATO, he wouldn't bat an eye, bat an eyelash. So it's a real possibility. That warning does not frighten Trump. In fact, it could encourage him.
Yeah. In your view, Dr. Sachs, what role should emerging powers like the BRICS nations, and I know that's a touchy topic with Trump, but what role could they possibly play in countering, what you term US hegemonic power grabs? Is there a role that they should be playing at all?
Yes, crucial. The BRICS represent the vast majority of the world population.
Yeah.
The emerging economies are about 85% of the world population. They actually want quiet. They don't want an American would-be hegemon running around making wars, grabbing territory, stoking big crises. And just to quickly say, the most dangerous war on the horizon is Iran,
yeah,
where it really seems very realistic that Israel will attack and the U.S. will always support Israel, and that could be a complete global disaster. Iran is a BRICS nation, by the way.
Yeah.
So I think the BRICS is extremely important to say we do not accept this kind of approach to the world. We want multilateralism. We want international law. This is actually crucial anyway for economic development and for our survival. And the BRICS are the responsible nations in the system right now. And so I always say to my friends, both in China and India, the two giants need, especially now, to get along with each other because the real problem is the instability coming from the United States. And I've said in India for many years, don't join an anti-China approach, the Quad and so forth. The U.S. is so unstable right now that don't play that game. Rather, join together with China, with Russia, with Brazil, South Africa, the other BRICS countries to say, we will provide a basis of stability and, by the way, economic growth, because the BRICS are the fast growing part of the world economy. And we will be a ballast, even as the U.S., sad to say, becomes rather unstable.
And we actually did see a bit of that last year, Dr. Sachs, as you well know, but the turbulence caused by Trump's tariff threats did create a situation where India and China in some ways called a bit of a diplomatic ceasefire and actually improved relations with each other.
And I would say, if I might, that the events taking place right now should have the same message to the leadership of India and China.
Yeah.
Stay closer, keep calm together, and resist the instability coming from the U.S. right now, because this actually is a problem for everybody.
I'd like to push you just a little bit further on that point, Dr. Sachs. India, prominent member of the BRICS, you talked about the China dynamic as well. But India is also currently embroiled in a fairly turbulent trade and tariff battle with the United States. There are many different layers of unpleasantness, if I may use that word, in the relationship, whether it is the ceasefire and Operation Sindoor or other things that are happening. How should India, view this entire regime change impulse that has now begun under Trump 2.0?
I said last year to Indian friends, don't expect that inside deal with the United States on trade. Don't expect that India is going to replace China in the U.S. value chains. The U.S. is too protectionist and too unstable for such an approach actually to be successful. I'm sorry to say that I was shown to be right when Trump did something even stupider than I would have imagined, putting on the penalty 25% plus the reciprocal 25%. The whole thing was completely out of control on the U.S. side. But it proved the basic point. India is not going to develop its economy and its future through some kind of alliance with the United States. I don't think many people think that way, but if they do, I would like to suggest an alternative, which is that India's place is as a leader of the 85% of the world in the emerging and developing economies outside of the US and Europe right now. And that is the fast growing part of the world economy. And it will be just fine if the BRICS cooperate closely, bring Africa into this, bring the Western Asian region into this. Then there's a real prospect for not only weathering the US instability, but actually having a very dynamic, positive economic future and geopolitical stability, despite what the US might be doing. It's just the US doesn't call the shots and shouldn't be, the bluster shouldn't make countries afraid of that.
My final question, Dr. Sachs, and this comes back to my introduction of you and the statement that you made in the United Nations Security Council has exploded everywhere. Everyone's watching your words, listening to them very carefully. You've urged the Security Council to stand up to these great power violations. Do you see any realistic path for the Security Council to take any concrete action against a permanent member like the US? Is that even possible? Is the UN even relevant anymore, given what we're seeing now?
Well, the Security Council itself certainly cannot take real action against the United States because the US will literally veto that. And that's the structure of the Security Council. But the UN is relevant in an overwhelming sense that it is the one place where the world's governments speak. And it makes a difference if 170 or 180 countries say, we don't want to go this way of lawlessness and anarchy. We want the UN Charter. The UN was made because of disaster in the world, and we can't afford another such disaster. Will that make a difference? Absolutely, for two reasons. One is if the rest of the world adheres to the standards of the UN Charter, even if the United States is blustering and breaking Chinaware, I was going to say, not to be confused, but just breaking the dishes everywhere. Let me state it better. Then the rest of the world will say, well, the U.S. is having a tantrum, but it's not really affecting the whole world. Let everybody remember the U.S. is only 4% of the world population. So it can't break the world through its tantrums alone. So this is one point. But second, it's also important to understand what's happening with American foreign policy is not the policy of the American people. It's not even the policy resulting from a political process. It is a deep state and a president who has certain proclivities that don't ask anything. They don't ask the Congress. They certainly don't ask anything of the American public. And the American public is not in favor of this. So if the rest of the world says, no, this has to stop, that's actually helpful for the American people also to tell their own government, no, we are not going to go on in this unconstitutional manner. And that can make a difference too. So I think the UN remains very significant, very weak in the actual ability to stop this, but extremely important if the world stands up and says, we want law, not anarchy, and not hegemony.
I'm going to leave it there for the moment, but Dr. Sachs, I can tell you that many of the things that you've said will fly in the face of popular wisdom here in India when it comes to India-US relations, and I think that's the best possible kind of interview that we could have done at this turbulent time at NDTV. So I thank you for your time. This has been very illuminating as always. We've learned a lot, and I'm sure NDTV's viewers will as well. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Great to be with you. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Every winter, The World Economic Forum at Davos becomes the world's thinking room, where power, policy and purpose converge, where the future is examined and reimagined. In January 2026, NDTV will be at the heart of this conversation. NDTV Ignite at Davos, this January on the NDTV network.